In every single cop show or movie that you've seen involving the police and law enforcement, you have probably heard this statement, or at least part of these statements. In fact, you probably know them by heart, but it wasn't always this way. So, why do those in law enforcement read these rights word for word when anybody is arrested? Well, here's the story told from the point of view of the arresting officer, Carol Cooley, about what happened in the state of Arizona in 1963 and why your rights are required to be read to you if you ever happen to be arrested. My name is Carol Cooley, retired police captain in the Phoenix Police Department. It was 1963, and I'd been on the Phoenix Police Department for, I'd say, about 5 years, and I had been a detective for 1 year. Back then, things were different, not just in Phoenix, but all over the place, how cops did things back then, all over the country. There weren't any real guidelines about what you now call the Miranda rights today. We didn't have to read anyone a list of rights when they were taken into custody. It was just generally assumed by both us officers and the suspects that you'd get those rights in court. I mean, ask anybody in law enforcement in those days. That's just how it was. Well, one spring afternoon, we had brought in a man named Ernesto Miranda. He was being questioned about the kidnapping and assault of an 18-year-old woman, but he was also a robbery suspect involving 2 different people in that same area. Anyway, we had placed him in a lineup. The victim identified him almost immediately. Afterward, we questioned him about what happened in our interview rooms. There was no threats, there was no intimidation, just a basic interview. Well, after about 2 hours, he confessed. He admitted to committing the crime. He even signed a written confession. And at the bottom, I made sure that it said, "This statement is made voluntarily without threats or promises." Well, the case, it went to trial, and that confession was definitely a powerful piece of evidence. Ernesto Miranda was, in fact, convicted and sentenced. The Arizona Supreme Court, it held up the conviction, and so did the 9th District Court of Appeals. It all seemed like any other case I'd been involved in. And I just went back to business as usual. But then the case went higher, all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, well, it took a step-by-step look at what happened in that interrogation room. They weren't really focused on whether Miranda actually did it or not. The evidence said he had. What they cared about was how we obtained that confession. The justices ruled that suspects must be informed of their rights before questioning, that they have the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, and that anything that they say can and will be used against them in a court of law. The decision finally came down in 1966, also commonly known as Miranda versus the state of Arizona. The conviction, however, was overturned, but the fight for justice for the victim was not. There were a few interesting details that many people who have heard this case may not be aware of. So, the state of Arizona, they retried Ernesto Miranda. He was convicted again and remained in prison. And he remained in prison and served about 11 years because he was, and again, this is something that a lot of people don't know, he was released for good behavior. It's kind of funny in a way. When Ernesto got out of jail, you know what he did? he autographed some of those cards that were given to police officers to read to the people when they were arrested. And he actually made a little bit of money doing it. But unfortunately, he never really made any lasting changes in his life, sadly. He continued to hang around the rough part of town, dealing with the same kind of rough people and that sort of crowd. But fate had one more twist. A little while later, Miranda, he got in a fight at a Phoenix bar over what witnesses said was a card game of some sort. He was stabbed, and he died on that barroom floor before help could even arrive. Here's a picture of one of the bartenders standing in front of the pool table, right in front of the place where Ernesto finally died. As fate and irony would have it, at the scene, Ernesto Miranda's alleged killer, before being questioned, was in fact read his Miranda rights. The man they were questioning, however, he gave a false name, and they didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. But when the police later learned of the killer's real name and that he was the one who did it, they went back to make the arrest, but he was not there. And to my knowledge, he has never been found. You know, people look at this case on the surface and they see a guy whose rights were violated. But there are so many more interesting details, interesting facts, and accounts that were involved in this incredible story. And I encourage anyone who is seeing this to research it. And you will see that it's not only fascinating, but there's so much more beneath the surface. You know, looking back, I don't think any of us realized how big that case would become. I was just doing my job as a detective, following the procedures we had at the time. But that Supreme Court decision changed the way that we did things in this country, and it changed them forever. It made sure that every person, guilty or innocent, knows their rights before even a single question is asked. But it's also a reminder that justice, it isn't only about finding the truth, it's about how we find it, how we obtain it. It's how we treat the guilty as well as the innocent. And that's very important. As for me, I really don't know if I could have done anything different or anything better back in 1963. And people, they always ask me that. And my reply has been the same for the last 4 decades. I believe I did the best I could with what I had at the time. So before we wrap up, I want to leave us all with just this one final message, is that it's important for each and every one of us to know our rights. This case was not just about one person. It's about all of us. And it's about knowing your rights. It's about knowing that, God forbid, if you're ever in a situation like this, that you do know that you have the right to remain silent, that you do have the right to an attorney. And that is in place to make sure not only that law enforcement follows the rules, does things within procedure, but also that our rights are protected. So knowing is empowerment. So I want you guys to never forget this and to go out there, be safe, stay protected, and remember that your rights matter.